that, I'd like to call on the stage Bill Bowling and our panel to talk about an issue that Dr. Lester focused on, homelessness, but not just homelessness by itself, but solutions to the problem. And in particular, solutions through the lens of empathy. So, Bill, if you and your panel would come up on stage, please, and what we'll do is we're going to have some discussion on this issue, then we're going to call Dr. Lester back on stage. We're going to take questions and answers. So begin thinking now about the questions. We've got one mic and a very important issue. Bill, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, President John. Thank you for hosting this conversation today. Terrence, thank you. It's like having the dessert before the meal here. Now we're going to talk about how we help young men like yourself. I want to thank Jennifer Doran, who was on the program committee and helped us set this up today. I thought I would just set a little context, and then we're going to be in a conversation here, and I promise we're going to have some time for you to ask questions. We don't want to assume that we're going to hit the mark of knowing what you're interested in. Some context. Nearly 40% of Americans lack enough money to cover a $400 emergency expense. 40% of Americans. Some of us had dinner this weekend and spent that money. An estimated 155 million people, 60% of Americans, lack a retirement-specific savings account. These are the people unprepared as they go into the future. Metro Atlanta has lost nearly 60,000 housing units that could have been rented by lower or moderate income residents in the last 5 years before COVID. The number of tenants who are extremely cost burdened are spending at least 50% of their income. It's about 28,000 people in Atlanta, 148,000 people in our 11-county region. If you spend over 50% of your income on housing, there's not enough money for child care, food, rent, utilities. I started my ministry a few blocks from here at St. Luke's Episcopal Church in 1975. We still have the problem. Does that mean I was not successful? No. It means that the community has not fully embraced this issue. So it's not a new issue for us, but what is new is the profile of who we're serving and how the response is organized. My hope is that you feel more hopeful and more empowered to respond at the end of this program. I want to quickly, and it's in your program, and I expect you to read it, so I don't have to read it to you, but Catherine Vessel is a Juris Doctor from Georgia State University and has an MSW from Hunter College School of Social Work, is admitted to the Georgia Bar in 2012. She's worked for over 20 years. Now think about being prepared as an attorney, as a social worker, having college degrees, and decide this is where I'm going to devote myself. That's what she's done for the last 20 plus years. So we're going to hear about the program she heads up and how it works. Jack Harden, one of our members, I think everybody knows well, is an attorney, is a partner at Smith, Gambrell and Russell, a visionary, an advocate for the homeless, an entrepreneur, a fundraiser, a translator, a bridge builder, and co-chair of the Regional Commission on Homelessness. Jack is a model for any of us in this room who uses their social capital to lean in to a challenging issue. So let me just get down and have our interview with our panelists. Okay, what we have is a subject that is going to require a lot more time than we have. So what I've asked Jack and Catherine to do is really, what do you want to share with this group? So you're going to hear nuggets of how things work, why they're committed, why we should feel hopeful. But it also, hopefully, is going to motivate you to follow up with them and the organizations they represent. So our goal today is to educate you on the work of serving the homeless, to give a sense of progress and a clear vision plan for going forward, and to leave this meeting feeling more hopeful and empowered to act. So Jack, what would you like to share with the group?
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Bill. Well, I think two of our biggest enemies in addressing this issue are misunderstanding and apathy. Apathy because people think it's an insoluble problem, and it's not. And I'd like to remind people in this room that we solved homelessness in America once before. We went from a Great Depression where a third of our population was unemployed and most of those were unhoused, to an economy in the early 50s in which every single able-bodied person could have a job that paid them a sufficient wage to afford housing. But a lot of things happened since that time, so that by the time Bill started the food bank, we had a situation where there's not a county in America today where a person working full-time at minimum wage can afford housing. Homelessness is essentially, Bill, an affordable housing problem. The difference in resources that people have and the cost it takes to house themselves. Now, the graph here, the red line, I don't know how well you can read it, but the red line is median income. And the time period is 1960 through a recent date, I think 2017. And you can see that from 60 to 70, and in the decades before it, the red line was doing pretty well. But in the 70s, it began to diverge. And for the last 50 years, the cost of housing, which is the top line, and the middle line is rent, they've been diverging. And they're continuing to diverge. So we've spent 50 years creating this problem, and there's not going to be an instant solution to end it tomorrow. But we need to address that dichotomy, the gap between incomes and resources on the one hand and housing cost on the other. Now that's apathy. That's misunderstanding. Apathy comes from the point I made earlier that people think the problem is insoluble. There are a lot of misunderstandings about the homeless population. The first is that most homeless people are suffering a mental disability and a substance use disorder. In fact, most people experiencing homelessness have neither a mental disability nor a substance use disorder. Yes, significant percentages of people do, but they're in the 30s, not in the 50s or 60s or 70s. And most of us, all we know about homelessness is what we see. And what we see is a presence on the streets that's troubling, we're fearful, we don't know how to deal with it. But it's not representative of the entire population experiencing homelessness. The second problem is that people who are experiencing homelessness are perceived to want to live outside and not come inside, because there's a great deal of fear when you're approached by someone you don't know and offers you an opportunity of who is this person, what's the catch, what's going to happen. I know how to cope in the environment I'm in. They're asking me to change my environment, and how do I know where that's going to be? So the fact that somebody doesn't accept an offer doesn't mean they want the condition they're in. And study after study after study has shown that if we offer people decent, safe, affordable housing, they'll take it. And Catherine, I think, will tell us that part of what we learned during the pandemic was offering people housing was much more effective than offering them a shelter bed. So I would like for us to take away, Bill, that this is a problem we can solve, that we have solutions that work. We have a rigorous, robust system in place to deal with this problem. What we need is support and understanding and, of course, resources from the community at large. We know the path, we know the road, and we just need to trot it.
Let me ask this question, Jack, because a lot of us, our experience is what we see on the street walking down here to the meeting. If you're over on Ellis Street, you can see 20 people sleeping on the street. Give me a larger context, because that's our experience of what we see every day. Here I'm really kind of fishing around for under Shirley Franklin starting a regional commission. Say something about that. Or how many people are living in motels out on 285? It's a larger issue.
It is, because of portions of the population are invisible to us. They're living in motels, or they're sleeping in their cars, or they're bunking in with friends. We don't have a good metric that tells us what every single person experiencing homelessness, where they are and how many there are. But we do have some metrics that we work with that help us understand trends. And when I first got invited to be involved with the Regional Commission 20 some odd years ago, our counts in the city of Atlanta were running 15,000 plus. We first started doing rigorous counts in 2001. And since then, the counts have come down by 80% in the 2 decades we've been working on this problem. In the last year or so, the unsheltered population is more visible and has gone up some. I'd say it's even more visible than the rate at which it went up. We have made a lot of progress. Frankly, a lot of what I thought about homelessness when I started trying to address this issue in the early 90s, I've now decided was wrong and simplistic and shallow. We have much better understanding of what the problems are that bring people to the situation and what are good strategies for dealing with it.
You know, I can remember back in my time, we used to work with the homeless Greyhound therapy. They'd put them on a bus from Gwinnett County and Cobb County and up in Commerce and send them downtown. Right? It's a larger issue, and it covers all those counties now. Let me turn to Catherine. You're on the ground. We have someone speaking from personal experience, someone who has leaned in to be an advocate and a translator. God bless you for being on the ground all these years. How does Partners for Home work? Who are your partners and collaborators?
Yeah, so Partners for Home was stood up about 8 years ago now to be the coordinating body for the Atlanta Homeless Continuum of Care. This is actually a requirement by the federal government, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, for any community that gets continuum of care funding. So this is also a specific funding stream from HUD that was actually launched during the Reagan administration for communities to address homelessness. And HUD saw the value in having that coordinating entity. So recognizing that the work is very complicated, that coordinating, aligning resources takes a level of leadership. And so the city put together this design committee, and they looked around the country and they said, you know, we cannot do this work alone with the public sector. We have to be able to leverage the private sector. And so COCs around the country actually all operate a little bit differently. Some operate out of their county or city government, and some have stood up 501c3s like Atlanta did. So they created Partners for Home to be that coordinating body. So we are what we call the lead agency or the collaborative applicant. Our job is to create and execute a strategic plan to reduce and end homelessness in our community. Many folks in this room were a part of that development, Jack and Milton, among others, in creating Partners for Home. So we get a lot of support from the city. We work very closely with the mayor's office, but we are a private entity by design so that we can go out and leverage the private sector and private resources to be able to do this work more impactfully. We do not do any direct services, although myself and many of our staff came from the direct service world. But rather we work alongside the homeless service providers day in and day out. So our emergency shelters, our permanent housing providers, our rapid rehousing providers, we coordinate street outreach work. Much of that work is done through work groups and committees, along with our governing board, which is a group of diverse stakeholders that helps create and set that strategy and that policy to help guide and direct our work.
And when you say there's a lot of folks out there working, and I know Hope Atlanta and In-Town Ministries, many of those, Gateway, how many caseworkers are out there?
Oh my gosh. I have no idea how many caseworkers total. I mean, for our current Housing Surge initiative right now, we have 7 teams across the city that are working to house a total of 1,500 households. And of those 7 teams, they probably make up 40 to 50 what we call housing navigators now.
Sure. And to get to Dr. Lester's point about being seen and acknowledged, that's where that happens,
Yeah.
right? That's the first encounter.
Yeah, 100%. To build on Dr. Lester's language, specifically that word dignity, right? We really believe that housing is the most dignified solution that we can offer to someone experiencing homelessness so that they can begin to rebuild their community and rebuild their life, really. We like to talk about our philosophical approach to this work is using a housing first philosophy. I think some people get confused by that. They think that we just mean housing alone. Here's key, good luck. And that is not, in fact, what we mean. Housing is really done in partnership with the individual person experiencing homelessness. I like to say that when you've met one person experiencing homelessness, you have just met one person experiencing homelessness. As Dr. Lester shared so impactfully, everybody's story is very unique and very different. And as Jack said, we can't categorize and lump all people who are homeless into one bunch of people with mental illness and addiction, because that is, in fact, very far from the truth. So we really start with individual people and try to be as client-driven as humanly possible. We try to understand what unique needs and preferences are, and then try to tailor housing solutions based on those unique needs and preferences.
Jack, I'm going to come back to you because I think it's so important to have a larger kind of vision of it's not just a few streets downtown where people are. The Regional Commission, Proteep, I know you're here. Why don't you stand up if people can see you, who staffs this every day at United Way. Proteep, thank you. Jack, what I'd like to ask, and let's try it out on the 100 people in the room. When you go pitch folks to please get involved, what do you want them to do? What can they do?
I think there are three options, Bill. First of all, you can give your energy, your talent, and your treasure. We obviously need that. Secondly, there are a lot of people in here who are employers, and you can encourage and organize volunteer opportunities for yourself and for your employees. And the third thing, which is just as important in my mind as the first two, is your convening power. This is an influential group of people, and we like to think about the power that you have to convene other people and the power you have to share the message. If you understand this problem the same way we do, I would like for you to share it with everybody in which it comes up and help disabuse people of the misconceptions they have. I think part of the power that Terry has in his story and in his speech is the humanity of the people we're trying to serve. And folks drive their cars and they see somebody with a shopping cart and it's an other. They don't connect with it. But this is a human problem. These are our neighbors. We've taken, Bill, just a small point here, but we've taken the zip code of the last permanent address of every person we've served since we opened the gateway in 2005. Over 80% of them are from Georgia, and approaching 80% of them grew up in the 5 counties in metropolitan Atlanta. So this is not a case of people from New York and Chicago coming down here to get our rich environment of human services. This is a case of our neighbors who've hit a bump in the road, and they're human beings. And I would like for people to understand that and convey that message to anybody who says one of the many thousands of shallow things that people say about this problem. So you can contribute your time and talent, you can volunteer, you can explain the message.
Okay. Everybody figure out which one of those things you're going to do?
Or do all three.
All right. Catherine and I, we talked about this a little bit before this session, and I think it's so important. We had a cathartic event with COVID. Agencies shut down. We were all kind of in a panic. How are we going to take care of each other? But we also had tremendous support during that time, at the federal, at the state level, at the local level. What we learned? What we learned that we could say, if we did more of that, we could really make a dent in this issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. COVID really positioned us to be able to test some new strategies at scale, and really just testing strategies at housing at the pace and scale with which we know we need to be able to do in order to reduce and end homelessness in our community. So just backing up one step in that, we were already investing in housing, and I had to cut out some of my slide. I apologize because you couldn't see it all, but we had been investing and created a pipeline in partnership with several of our public partners, our housing authority, Fulton County, to provide the supportive services for all units that we develop over the next 30 years. So created a pipeline to build and invest in new housing. We have 610 units online now, invested $22 million to that end. These are a couple examples of those units here. A quick map that shows you where we are investing, which is developments, mixed income, multifamily developments all over the city, where we are building new units of dedicated supportive housing, which is prioritized for people who are designated as chronically homeless, who have long-term disabilities, and long lengths of stay in homelessness. Oh, PSH means permanent supportive housing. Again, another evidence-based housing solution. But what COVID did was, because housing takes time to build, right? What COVID did was it actually enabled us to cobble together resources at scale really, really, really quickly, right? So when COVID hit in March of 2020, we were in communication with the city, our city partners, and they said, we've got a lot of stimulus funds available. What are we going to do with it? And we were looking at partnership communities around the country and looking at some of their investments. And Houston was saying, we're going to go big. We're going to house over 2,500 households with stimulus dollars. And so we decided to replicate and do the same thing. We set about an ambitious goal to house 2,000 households through rapid rehousing and diversion. And we actually exceeded that goal. And we saw our 2022 point-in-time numbers go down quite dramatically as a result of this rapid housing surge that we launched. It enabled us to position boots on the ground, quite literally, in our housing navigation and street outreach teams to go out, engage people who were outside, and get them off the street very quickly. It enabled us to stand up non-congregate shelter through hoteling, which you may have heard about. So we actually transitioned the Ramada Hotel down the street on Hank Aaron and created non-congregate shelter. We needed a way to get people out of congregate environments. Traditional shelter is like bunk bed style shelter, where many people are just simply not interested in living in a congregate shelter environment with 150 to 100 strangers. And what we found was when we came outside to individuals and said, how about a hotel room? A place that, again, is dignified, where you can close and lock the door, where you can protect your stuff and be assured that it won't get stolen, or rummaged through, where you can have some safety from other people and other strangers that you don't know if you do have a mental illness and might be feeling paranoid about being around a lot of strangers. And that proved to be another incredible tool that we could use to get people off the street very quickly. From there, we were able to use this money that had been invested at scale to be able to quickly coordinate our system to make housing placements. And now we're in the process of replicating that. Through second round of stimulus dollars that afforded us another $27 million with a goal now to house 1,500 households. And we're in the process of meeting that goal by the end of '24. To date, we've housed almost 900 households, about half of whom have come directly off the street. So communities all around the country have been able to test these strategies to be able to stand up their systems, to be able to operate, again, at the pace and scale with which we need to make housing placements, get people out of homelessness quickly and into housing as quickly as possible.
So your point would be that through that kind of support, we learn what was effective. We learned we could really get the numbers down. We learned we could have appropriate housing for the needs of folks. So if we did more of that.
That's right. Creating essentially an emergency response system for homelessness. Through the LIFT work, we created the infrastructure to also be able to house at that pace and scale. So we have one agency we contract with to do all unit acquisition. They go out and find landlords and pay landlords hold fees and landlord incentives to be able to take people who are formerly experiencing homelessness. We go out and employ the number of caseworkers and housing navigators that we need to be able to move very quickly and get large number of people off the street. We have one fiscal agent that cuts all the rent checks so that housing navigators and case managers don't have to worry about that component of the work and all of the compliance that's required when you're using federal dollars to pay rents and utilities.
So Catherine mentioned, Jack, I know the answer, but I'm going to ask you to share it with everybody, because I've been with you on a couple of trips. How are we learning from others? If we read a report that LA's doing this, Houston's doing that, Flagstaff, Arizona's doing another thing, I mean, you get on a plane, go visit them, Jack, or you call them up, or Catherine, is there a network of folks where we're learning from each other?
There definitely is a network. First of all, they're national advocacy organizations. By the way, Bill, most of their creation dates were the late 70s, about the same time the food bank. And so we exchange. We steal ideas liberally, shamelessly, from other communities. Sometimes we go visit folks, and some of those meetings are just incredibly insightful. We see how people are doing things effectively in their communities, and then we try to
Give an example, Jack. I mean, I know you and I went to Austin, Texas. I know you've been to other cities. What do you see when you go to another?
Well, Austin, Texas is a great example. This rapid housing strategy that Catherine is now leading for the city of Atlanta with the support of the city of Atlanta, where we're going to use containers and other tiny homes that we can get to a housing unit in a much shorter period of time than it takes to develop the units that are in the pipeline. The premier example of that, in my view, is Community First in Austin, Texas. And it's called Community First because I think Dr. Lexter would be very happy with this. They recognize the thing that most people experiencing homelessness miss that the rest of us have is a community. And so their whole strategy is to create that community first. But we've also been to South Carolina and Santa Barbara and Seattle and other places. So we do try to learn from others, and none of us think that we have all the answers. And we're quick to recognize when other people are doing it better.
And Catherine, examples?
Yeah, I would just add, it was interesting, my counterpart for the San Diego COC published an op-ed recently, and she was acknowledging all the attention that Houston has gotten as a community at making significant strides at reducing and ending homelessness. And the reality is, I'm going to the National Leadership Council tomorrow in Los Angeles with my counterparts from all over the country that's led by the National Alliance to End Homelessness. When we get together, I realize that none of us are really doing anything different from the other. It's really about the scale and pace. And the San Diego op-ed said, yes, Houston is leading the way, but Houston has also acknowledged they have been really fortunate at the availability of affordable housing in their community. And that has positioned them, along with the coordination of the right amount of resources, to be able to move people exit out of homelessness, again, at the pace and scale with which they need to be able to see those demonstrable results. And so, as you could imagine, somebody in San Diego, or really anywhere along the West Coast, is feeling just the pain, quite honestly, of working in and amongst a market that is almost impossible to navigate for somebody who has $600, $700, $800 a month in income, or in some cases no income, because they might be disabled and they might be working through the bureaucracy of the Social Security disability income application process, which in some cases can take 3 to 4 years. And so, we as a community have to get our hands around the affordability crisis in this city. Or we are going to be at a cliff like many of these other communities are facing. And so the formula is pretty straightforward. We have to be able to be investing, again, at that right level to ensure that we can exit people out of our system into the right type of housing with the right type of supports, in excess to the number of people that are coming into our system. And inflow into our system has to do with the prevalence of affordable housing in our community, and deeply, deeply affordable housing.
I learned a long time ago to get along with Jack, you give in early and give in often. So if he calls you up and wants to have a few words with you about this subject, I just get your checkbook out and get ready to contribute. I'm making a joke here, Jack, but you are one of the people and one of the key people that goes to these different venues. Two things here. One is we do feel, and I feel, having worked since 1975, we're in a moment around affordable housing. It's acknowledged, we can measure it, we can see the cost of not dealing with it. We also are challenged to say, what's the role of the public sector and the private sector? So, Jack, if you would go over and talk to Commissioner Nunn at DCA, which I know you do, what would you say the role of the state is? And I would make note that the governor's sitting on, $16, $18 billion? We have some ideas for him. We might give some here today. But if you wanted DCA to lean in, what's their role? And Catherine, I'll ask you the same thing.
Well, you mentioned DCA. That is our state's housing agency. You need to be able to build the affordable units, but you also need to be able to operate them. And particularly with our system, you need a reliable flow of income just for operating costs. We have an extraordinarily generous community, and it's well-resourced, and we've gotten tremendous support from the private sector, not just United Way, but especially United Way, but all of our foundations. But by and large, they don't want to adopt us for the rest of their life. They want us to present them with projects to fund that we can complete. The ongoing cost of operating a system that makes that happen is really something only the public sector can provide. But I would say to Christopher Nunn, and have said to Christopher Nunn, we need to build more housing. You can't build a battery plant that's going to hire 5,000 people without worrying about where these 5,000 households are going to live. So 2/3 of the people in metropolitan Atlanta spend 45% or more of their income on transportation and housing. We have a population, 2/3 of which are living precariously. And as effective as this system that Catherine has actually been transformational in her leadership, as effective as it is, it doesn't end the problem. The problem has to be ended by affordable housing and closing that gap between income and the cost of housing. And if you look around the country and you say, why are there so many homeless people in California? It's not because the weather's good. It's because they can't afford housing. It's not because there aren't resources to deal with them. They have billions. But look at Massachusetts. The weather's not good there, and they have affordable housing problems and a huge house. All our coastal cities have this affordable housing problem worse than we do. So what I'd say to the state is they have to be involved, but they can't do it all by themselves.
Okay.
It takes private.
And Catherine, who do you look to as partners as you try to put these things together?
I thought I got to answer that question. Well, the public and the private sector are both critical. I mean, literally every public entity that you could think of, we look to partner and align with us. Our State Department of Behavioral Health is a critical example. Although we say that not the majority of people in our system are experiencing mental illness, those that are using up most of the time, attention, energy, resources of the providers and services in our system. They have a voucher that they invest in, for example, and it is underutilized. And so we need to be able to maximize those types of public resources. At both the state and the local level, we do not have any dedicated revenue committed for homelessness as a community. As a city, we get about $12 million annually from HUD that pays for our housing interventions. All of that housing we fill through attrition. So we have to wait for somebody to move out of existing housing before we can move a homeless person into new housing. So we get turnover at a rate of about 15 to 25 units per month. That is not nearly enough to be able to do what we need to do. Most communities have some sort of dedicated revenue at the state or local level. We've been funding the State Housing Trust Fund at $3 million for the last 20 years out of the general fund at the state level. That is used across the entire state for homelessness, $3 million. So we spread it around like peanut butter. You get 20,000, you get 20,000. I'm looking at Ailey Red from Covenant House. I can tell you she would say there's nothing she can do with 20,000 to make any impact on youth homelessness as a community. So we have got to be honest and courageous about how we are investing in this issue if we actually want to make an impact. And then on the private philanthropic side, we need philanthropy to come alongside the public sector. And we saw an incredible example of this through Home First that Jack was just instrumental in leading at the tail end of the Reid administration, where Reid agreed to initiate a $25 million bond and that he would match that dollar for dollar, whatever we could raise in the private sector. That led to a $50 million investment, which positioned us to be able to build new units of supportive housing. So we need that catalytic investment, but we also need it on an ongoing year-over-year basis, and we need funders that would be willing to step up to the plate to consider funding in that way, to position us to be able to make strategic investments.
Bill, we've got some great comments here, but I want to make sure we open it up to questions and answers. So I've invited Dr. Lester back up on stage, and we have one mic here, and I know we have a lot more to cover, but very important set of issues. So Bill, I'm going to put you up here on the podium. Dr. Lester, please come up and join us on the stage. Begin to think about your questions. We've got a mic here, and again, particularly think about ways we can consider solutions.
Thank you, John. It made it a lot easier for you to do that than me. Let me just open it up. And I know we got one mic. There may be others going around. I don't want to presume that we've answered all your questions. But the last question I was going to ask, which we'll get in here somewhere, is how do we measure success? Things that get done. I know we have an answer to that. But let me open it up. Question here?
Dr. Lester, you talked about empathy. Can you tell me one thing I can do differently to show empathy when I'm driving or walking by a person that's unhoused?
Yes. I normally talk about homelessness not being monolithic. And the reason why I say homelessness is not monolithic because it's not one size fits all. I think our panelists have described homelessness in a myriad of ways. It's to really do the introspective work to start reframing how we actually think about the subject. When you see someone on a street corner within a 20-second time frame, we have to understand that that person has a story that supersedes that block of time that we're seeing them in. And we have to start there. Jack talked about the first mass homelessness era, which is the Great Depression. The second mass era is the contemporary era that we find ourselves in. And in my scholarly opinion, we are headed towards a third mass era, which is the era of unaffordability in which we're talking about. People who have never been chronically unhoused will be chronically unhoused for the first time in their lives. And we have to do the introspective work to start challenging the narratives that have been embedded in us and really do that work of seeing our neighbor, which Jack talked about, as a person, as a human being, as a living and breathing soul that is worthy and deserving of dignity.
Thank you. And just a quick shout out to Dr. A, CEO of Covenant House, Georgia, because many of us will be sleeping out with her to end homelessness for you.
excellent panel.
We just say who we are, so
Okay.
everybody in the room knows who we are.
Yeah, I'm Margie Stagmeyer. I'm on the supply side of affordable housing. Excellent panel. I want to make a comment. So again, I build and own affordable housing, and I want to talk a little bit about the regulatory environment. So if you look at the number of people that die in fires every year, it's roughly 2,000, yet there's 500,000 to 600,000 people a year that are homeless. And I just know, as someone who tries to renovate properties, a lot of times the fire marshal makes it impossible to do it in a way that's affordable. So I think I look at the homeless issue here as a symptom of also our regulatory environment that is getting harsher and harsher. Is there anything in the pipeline to address the regulatory environment?
Well, I could give you kind of an answer, non-answer. I'll just, because I didn't get to, I was gonna try to jump back to one slide. I didn't get to touch on this. We have launched to answer some of this question, I think. And Darian is here, who is our master developer with Atlantica Properties, so he may be able to jump in. But we've launched what we're calling a rapid housing initiative to answer some of this, which is how can we build housing faster on using publicly owned land with alternative housing products. So this first initiative at 184 Forsyth is using containers. Our goal is to do 500, recognizing how long construction timelines take. And one thing this is affording us, because we are on publicly owned land, although it doesn't avoid code issues, because the sprinkler system is killing Darien, I know right now, but it is avoiding some zoning challenges. So we are able to fast track some things in the development, this type of development, given that it's on publicly owned land, but I think we are still faced with some regulations, and specifically the fire code, is one of those in particular. I don't know if it would be appropriate, but maybe, I don't know if Darian wants to add anything to that.
Thank you.
Hi, Mary Moore. Great panel and discussion, and sort of one, similarly to what Margie was alluding to, and Catherine, you were talking about it earlier, the complexity of the issue. People become housed, and then how do we ensure that they stay housed, they keep their jobs, they have transportation that actually works for them? Who really is the quarterback for changing our society and helping the community understand how complex this is and how many things we need to really address before the bigger picture gets solved?
I'm happy to kick that off. I mean, in the housing that we develop and invest in, again, we don't place anybody into housing and give them a key and say, good luck. We tailor housing with supportive services. So in permanent supportive housing, someone would be afforded a case manager for the life of the time that they are in that unit. We have some people in supportive housing for 20 plus years. And again, it's all tailored based on the needs of that individual. Some people no longer need services after a period of years. In rapid rehousing, same thing. That person is going to have case management support services until they no longer need it, and that's less intensive, maybe 6 to 12 months. And ideally, we're helping that person get connected to community where they are moving into housing. Just a quick data point, our housing that we invest in actually has a very good performance. Our system performance measures that you can look at online are at a rate of 5% return. So people that go into our housing only come back into homelessness at a rate of 5%. Now we look at that over a 2-year time period. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Let me just make that point. Dr. Lester talking about being seen and acknowledged. When we develop supportive housing, that is how you're seen and acknowledged in what your particular needs are, right? And then we craft that around. And to have only a 5% of folks who turn back, we know that works. You want to say anything, Jack?
No, I think that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions. The first one has to do with homeless children and the work of the Boise Ansley School for Homeless Children. My question is, how effective is that in attracting homeless children and being successful in keeping them there over some period of time? And the second question has to do with what Jack said, which had to do with the fact that most of the homeless are from our region rather than from out of state. And is part of the problem a failure of the social system of family who is not taking care of each other in ways that they historically have?
So I think the first question on the Ainsley School, I don't know specifically. From my understanding, I was there recently. So this is a school that was stood up by an individual it's a private school for kids who are experiencing homelessness. And I think their goal is to really reduce transiency among kids who either are in homelessness now but have exited out of homelessness. And from my understanding, that has been very effective. One challenge that I think they are faced with is being able to keep kids at the school once the families have been housed. And so they've been looking at investing in transportation resources to be able to ensure those kids can continue to come to school. And Jack?
Yeah, just on the Ainsley School, I would say that there are a number of agencies that address this issue of the children of people experiencing homelessness, including the Atlanta Children's Center, Our House, the Ainsley School. All of these strategies are important and necessary, and the ones I'm aware of are doing an effective job. But it's like everything else. There's a greater need than there are facilities available. On your second point, we've spent a lot of time in our community lately focusing on something called the social determinants of health. The healthcare system has recognized that about 20% of a patient's health is affected by what happens in a clinical setting. And the other 80% of the things that govern our health are things outside. And these include access to health care, but preventive health care, education, employment, good air. All of these things are also social determinants of experiencing homelessness. And it has to be said that systemic racism may lead the pack in the main cause of homelessness after affordable housing. 90% of the people we see are African American. They're only half the community. They're way overrepresented in the population that experiences homelessness. And they grew up in difficult situations, dangerous neighborhoods, poor air quality, poor schools, poor access to health care. These things affect your ability to survive in our society. And we could have a whole program on
So, Jack, we got two more. We're in a speed round here. I want to get the questions, even if we don't get them answered. We'll know what's on your mind.
Hi, Stephanie Blank. So Chloe already mentioned it, but there are several of us in this room sleeping out Thursday. For homeless kids, we would invite anybody else to come sleep with us. Maybe I need to rephrase that.
You got a question?
Sleep out with us. So the question is, can you talk about the unique challenges that come with homeless youth and how different that can look? Because often they are really invisible because they're couch surfing. But can you talk about what it means to give youth, 18 to 21-year-olds or 16 to 21-year-olds housing?
Need a 30-second answer.
Yeah, firstly, I want to say no child wakes up in the morning and wants to be homeless. No child. And stability for children who are very transient gives them the type of stability emotionally, socially, spiritually, all of the components needed to be a stable, functioning child and young person. ACE, adverse childhood experiences, 10 questions. Most children who grow up impoverished will score 10 out of 10. That's something to think about when you think about thresholds. You have to climb up out of emotionally to get to a level ground and then build from there. And so it's very important for us to provide the resources needed for youth to be visible, to be seen, to have the types of supports needed so they can flourish in our society. And the reason I say that is because youth is the fastest growing population of people experiencing homelessness in the United States of America. It's not adults.
Dave?
David Lewis, I wanted each of you or one of you to address NIMBY, not in my backyard, and how that impacts your abilities to do something about this challenge.
So David, that's a softball, right? So we all recognize that there is a disconnect between people's abstract wish that we solve this problem and the way they make their decisions that impact them. I call it the tyranny of small decisions. Other people are much more critical. But we have to get comfortable with increased density. We have to get comfortable with more public and less private transportation if we're going to solve this problem. And it's one of the nice things about Catherine's chart. Go back to the chart that shows all the places where we have built permanent supportive housing. We're distributing this to the best of our ability all over the community. Every community says, that's a great problem, but why don't you build it over there? Buckhead can afford it, or there's already poor people down here, so put it down here. Everybody has a reason why it's not their problem, but it's all our problem. It's an existential threat to the stability of our society. So we have to find a way to come to grips with that.
Please thank the panel for being there. How many people feel more or better educated on this issue than when they came in? And how many people feel more empowered that they could play a role, do something? All right, good session. Thank you, guys.